so many questions. Wow, that was really good. Why the title, All We Leave Behind?
The title comes from a poem by Richard Wagamese, the novelist. People know Richard Wagamese? And it's a poem called the Canada Poem. And in this poem, and it takes an Anishinaabe man, an Ojibwe, to tell us what Canada is, but he describes Canada as a kind of bonfire. He says the word actually comes from the campfire. And this idea that everyone who comes to Canada comes with a story. We all have a story, and as we tell our story, as we arrive at this great big bonfire of Canada, and as we share those stories as immigrants or refugees or newcomers over the generations, as we tell a story, we share with others and we empathize with others, and we all become one. And that's how Canada becomes one country. And the line of the poem is that he said, all we leave behind and all we carry forward are our stories.
You know, you speak a lot about the fact that it's true. When we were in journalism school, we were taught that you have to be objective. You're not part of the story, and you don't take sides. But seriously, you took sides. Do you feel that you lost your objectivity as a journalist because you took sides?
Yes and no. It certainly got me into a state of being angry in a way that wasn't healthy or helpful. I needed to get back away from that, and I found that difficult. I found it difficult to find that line almost on a daily basis of, I would be early in the morning on the phone, hammering away at some bureaucrat someplace, trying to get this family out of danger. And they were in constant danger. Rashid Dostum, who is now the vice president of Afghanistan. Didn't that help the story I did? They were being pursued all the time. Scary things happened. There was attempted hit and run. There was attempt to abduct his daughter. They were moving constantly. So 9 years of this. And I would be fighting away in the morning trying to get something done, trying to move this one. And I had no idea if I was even, it was pointless. I wanted someone just to say, give up, surrender, forget it. You're never going to get them out. I even at one point decided I was going to clean up my entire bank account and send it to them and say, just run, just go to get on one of those boats, go to the Mediterranean if you can get there, and try and get here whatever way you can, because I'm not helping. And so then I'd finish that and pack my lunch and go to work, and then interview Chris Alexander and try and ask him politely about what was going on. And as you know, he hung up on me once, And but I found it, so I had to find that line, and it was very, very difficult. But I had a lot of help. The people I worked with, they knew that I was always on this line, and so they were watching all the time. And I think I managed to pull it off. I'm not sure.
You did, but I always found it very difficult when covering conflict, one side or the other. There's always a stronger side. It's very difficult not to side with the weak.
Of course.
You kind of have to comfort the afflicted. That also is our job. So really, I've come to the conclusion after several decades in this business that we really are never objective. Are we ever really perfectly objective?
Well, I think the objectivity, I think you have an informed point of view, and that's what I think, what I've tried to acquire in my life, is that yes, I have a point of view, but it should be informed. And sometimes I actually have a point of view I don't even agree with, but I know that that's sort of what, Edward R. Morrow, how much am I dating myself that I know who Edward R. Morrow is? Okay, right, okay. So he's like, so I'm 108. So I know, not bad, right, for 108. But Edward R. Morrow said there are two sides to every story, but they're never equal. And if you tell both sides fairly, one side will always outweigh the other. And on the other, I also think, as I said, that to human rights, to care about human rights, to be on the side of human rights is not a bias. That is not to lose your objectivity. Human rights are a universal right. They are what everybody is entitled to. And so to care about others from that point of view is, you're never biased when that's the case. And so the people who are being pummeled by bombs in Syria or Afghanistan or whatever, I don't have to really think about Edward R. Morrow's thing on balance, I mean, it's like, one side hits the floor with balance, and you know which side you have to be on.
I just want to let you know that there are two mics, one there, and that you're more than welcome to ask questions. Don't be shy. We are also taught in journalism school that there are no silly questions, only silly answers, which you won't get here, of course. So go ahead, get up and ask questions. So I want to ask you this. There are many instances, and you spoke about those, when you decided that you weren't going to give your cell phone, you were going to leave these people behind because it was more important to tell their stories. Do you ever think back to those times and think, maybe I could have done something?
I did, but I think the difference between when I was, say, covering the chocolate and that the cocoa crisis, that Donald Trump knows all too well, but I was dealing with these child slaves and these children, and I was documenting that, and that was probably the most time I thought, I can't leave these kids behind, And so, but the difference with the area walls is that I had created the problem, and I did not create the problem for the others. I had to report on them, but I didn't feel the same obligation. I felt a stronger obligation to get the story out and get the facts out than to get the kids out, because if I could get, and it did make a big difference. I mean, that book had huge impact. That changed things. Policies changed. They're just absolutely, there's still lots more to be done, but it did change things about cocoa and what sources they have to have and what proof you have to have that the kids aren't being enslaved and not even using child labor to get cocoa, which is I consider a huge accomplishment. But yeah, I wanted to get those kids out. I was terrified for them. I left them behind, and I'll never forget that.
So, we always hope that what we do has an impact and changes policies and for the better, obviously. But in the case of All We Leave Behind, Mr. Dostum is the vice president. Mm-hmm. So how does Assad feel about that? Because he really left everything behind. And, maybe his children have more of a future than he does, but he is probably melancholic, as many people who have to flee their countries for something that is so completely different. So maybe his children will be more adapted, or will adapt so much better than him. So how does that feel for him, and how does that feel for you, that really not much has changed?
No, nothing. It's worse. I think when we talk about it, and we do talk about it, the feelings of absolute futility and uselessness I think of all the times, of all the stories I've covered that hit me in the face, that I actually feel the pointlessness of the profession. It was covering Afghanistan. It was just completely pointless. Everything we did, all we risked, the journalists who died, the people who died, everything we did, and it's just as bad a mess. It's worse mess than it was. The Taliban, the ISIS, just the whole thing is just awful. And the degree to, and that the story of Afghanistan is entirely the story of intervention, whether it starts with the British and then the Americans and Ronald Reagan's proxy war with Russia, with Soviet Union, fought in that soil that destroyed it. They left it behind and it's a failed state. Al-Qaeda moved in, and then they came and tried to get rid of Al-Qaeda, and then they lived in a failed state again. I mean, it's over and over and over, and I'm going to say this word, they have been fucked over in that country so many times. And so, and so at that moment, I have to say, there was this weird sense that a lot of us had that because Canada was there, and a lot of other countries were there at the beginning, it's 2001, just after 9/11, that even Obama called it the first just war. It was a just war, that they were there, they were actually going to make a difference, that we're going to clean up this mess and then they didn't. They left. They went off they said, oh, we got to fight Iraq instead. And so that was that feeling that this was something, and Assad felt it, and I felt it, at least in 2002, that yes, this could make a difference. We could actually turn this around with good reporting, and it was wrong. We were simply wrong.
How about the refugees? Oh, I see that we have somebody asking a question. Go ahead. You want here? I have one. This one works.
Thank you. One really cool thing, because when I came here, similar to you, the whole idea of milking people's emotions and having journalists get involved in being the story rather than just reporting the story, something I really despise, and I He's been more and more prominent in American media, like you said. But the way you just sort of took us on an arc by first describing some situations that you are still not sure if you did the right or wrong thing, then discussing the journalist who reported on the kids of drug abusers, and whether that was right or wrong. True, the effects of that story by just being reported is much bigger than just trying to get involved. But we are in a day and age where social media is so prominent and there's so much media out there that you're never going to watch everything. Is milking the story and being the story, if it results in much wider spread of news and things happening, the right approach nowadays? And should people, even if we don't like it, do that in order to have the most impact? Similar to the whole idea of the journalist from LA. Thank you again.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that I haven't seen any evidence that it works. And what I've seen is it just build the brand of the journalist. I think that solid reporting, as though, I know you're saying, but with all that noise, I mean, what does it mean to have done a solid report? That doesn't get anywhere. But somebody milking the emotions, face on the camera and saying, I'm here with this little kid, or I'm here with this war behind me, or look at me, look at the, and we have that, and that's just clickbait, right? We just, oh, look at that, I'm going to share that. Well, that's really amazing. Whoa. I haven't seen any evidence that it has any effect. I have seen evidence of good reporting getting something done. If you just saw just yesterday this extraordinary thing that BBC Africa put out, where they had a piece of tape that came out in July. It's the most disturbing thing I have ever seen on film. But it was these soldiers filmed themselves shooting 22 times, shooting 2 women and their babies, and who were suspected of being part of Boko Haram. And what the reporters did, what the journalists did, was that they looked at all the film. They said, okay, this is horrible stuff in the foreground. Let's look in the background. Look at this ridge of hill, and look at this, and look at this building here. And they painstakingly dissected every frame of that and found out where it was, because Cameroon said it wasn't us, it must have happened in Mali. They found exactly the village in Cameroon where it happened, exactly the moment it happened, the day practically, the people that it happened to, and the actual men who were involved with it, who have now been arrested in Cameroon. That is reporting.
But you know, nowadays, it's true that you've got to use a whole bunch of, hey, look at me jumping up and down, because there is so much out there on social media, everywhere on all those platforms, that perhaps the kind of classic reporting of.
But I'll just say this BBC Africa thing was entirely done in tweets. It was 8 tweets. The whole thing was 8 tweets. The video, and then here, look at this mountain thing, and this is what we know. Here's this village, here's this. 8 tweets, bing, 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 bing. 7 guys.
That's how you get attention now.
Yeah.
Right. When we started, there were just a few television stations. We were good with that. We were okay with that.
It was in color.
Yes.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. And there was sound. There was sound.
sound.
Yeah. So sorry, go ahead. I think I have support.
This might work.
Oh, it works.
Thank you very much for that very interesting and very moving story. I think you suggest, among other things, that journalists do have a tendency to idealize certain principles, maybe over-idealize certain principles. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the... I'm guessing that there's probably a range of opinion that you have encountered among your colleagues and other people that you discussed this with. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the kind of conversations that you've had with, especially colleagues, about your decision and what the reaction's been like.
Royce and I can both talk to this. I took a lot of flack for that decision to pull out that day in the Opium Forum. Everyone I worked with was really, really angry with me. Some people one person never spoke to me again. Every other I don't know if I was the right to do it, but I'll never forget seeing that black car, the SUV, and the guy got out of it, black turban, Taliban. And I thought, this is going pear-shaped. And I just couldn't do it. I actually think, see, I left TV shortly after that. I went to As It Happens within months of that. And I thought I'd lost my nerve. I'd lost my ability to do it. And a lot of colleagues throughout all the time, even in times when I would do something to help, just even a small way, I would be with people who said, we don't do that. Lots of reporters I worked with were appalled at getting involved at all. Had really, really an ability just to stay absolutely focused. I don't know how they did it. I mean, it just broke my heart all the time. But at least I understood. I was more. If I was going to err, I was going to err on that side. I cleave to that idea. I still think that's really important as the principle. What I'm totally appalled by is those who are using the calamity, the crises of others, to be on to use as their backdrop for their brand. That is the thing that disgusts me the most about journalism.
We see that a lot, actually, on American television after a hurricane or during a hurricane. You notice that? Like, you want to tell them, just go inside. What are you doing? You're the only one out there, right?
So yeah, you can't stop thinking about this, but it's their moment, right? It's their award-winning moment. Hi.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation, and also more so, thank you for your humanity on the program. It's not only heartwarming, but it's where you get past the talking points and you actually bring some insight.
Thank you.
You know, that's very thankful. And also thank you for bringing that family. It's an honor being in the same.
Thank you.
My question goes beyond just being a journalist. And it's the question of celebrities. We seem to live in a time of celebrities. And recently, Lise Doucette was here in Ottawa to receive, I think it was the Peter Sturgesberg Award for war journalism. And she recounted a bit of CBC and other Canadian journalists during World War II. And she called them household names. They weren't personality. They were there doing their job, rather than having chats with other people in the media. Not commenting on any news program. That is not public a service, you know, finding out about things. Why do you think we're in a world of personalities?
So many. It's like,
Or celebrities.
Right? Yeah, celebrities. Where do we begin?
Oh, God.
Yeah, I'll try and narrow it to the field of what we do. I think it's for some people are encouraged to be celebrities. I saw this a lot with Jian Ghomeshi, you know, as he was a colleague. I worked with him. Radio is a very small place in Toronto. And I saw the degree to which he started to believe that he really was him and not all these people that made him what he was, you know. All the people who worked to get his interviews on the air, everything. He just forgot that that wasn't important to him. He started to believe in his own mythology, his own. And my husband, Lyndon McIntyre, he calls it host disease, and what he means by that is that you start to think that you're important, and you start to act. And I think that ego is the first thing that happens, right? You really have to. And I was so happy that I knew Lyndon, well, for many reasons, being married to him for many years. But he taught me a lot. I mean, he was really, really an important kind of mentor in my life, and he was the one who really, really early warned me against that. Because I'll tell you, it's really hard to resist. I mean, people are blowing smoke up your ass a lot of the time, you know? People are trying to encourage you to be that, trying to jump in front of the camera, to be the personality, to use yourself. And I'll see some of my colleagues do that. I won't mention any names, I took someone to task. I just tore his face off for something he had done, which I thought was just appallingly bad journalism because he made it about himself. And he never spoke to me again. I could make the list of people who never spoke to me again. But, and I stopped doing that. But I think that, yes, there's a lot of things that encourage it to happen, but the biggest problem, the reason why we have that cult of celebrity or we have that, is because the people involved themselves want it. They get off on it. They want to be that person.
And I think also we're competing now, and maybe that's why it's a little bit more obvious and vulgar now. This thing is that you're competing against so many other platforms, whereas before, seriously, it was a few channels, and we knew every night who we were watching, and it was, you know, the same people, the same faces. So they became household names. Today, you're competing against 100 other platforms, and you know, sort of people who write blogs and people who tweet and people who, and so it becomes a lot noisier and actually a lot tackier,
Yeah.
right? Basically now because of that. So you're and I'm not a host, by the way. Just you want to say that?
Wait, so you have no host disease, is that what you're saying?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. You mentioned that you were surprised at the lack of thought that was put into the reporter's relationship with their sources and what that should look like. How do you see this gap being addressed, and have you seen examples of it starting to be addressed more often?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It worries me, actually, that we don't. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to add that part here at Carleton, because I think that's something that we have to start instilling. It really worries me, for instance, I mean, we think that just because we're not there, we're not having this effect. Let's just say, take one example, Tahrir Square in Cairo, where we had all kinds of young people who believed that they were in the moment of like bringing Mubarak down. They were in the moment of change. Democracy was coming to Egypt. And there were all these young people, their faces on cameras, their voices on, speaking openly, you know, very similar to what we saw in Tiananmen Square with the Chinese students, right? And you know what happened in China, they just rolled the tanks over them. And the same thing is a lot of those students disappeared. And I started to get really, really worried about this and saying, what are we doing? Are we calling on secure lines? Are we protecting identities? Should we be altering the voices? We have to do more. I know this is a fast-breaking story, but I didn't know enough of myself about encryption and about how to actually get a line that's secure so that maybe no one can be listening in on it, a whole bunch of stuff like that. And so since then, I've started to try it at CBC to see more things we can do, more training we can have as to how we can do a better job at protecting people we're calling out into the field. So that's the beginning, but it's just a whole series of things. I mentioned one thing that people do now is that if you're filming someone, you're in the field, we used to have to carry all those tapes back with us, and it was terrifying that they'd get, and I had tapes many times that disappeared. And I don't know what was on them and who I might have incriminated, but it was frightening. What we can do now is you get your information, you send it to somebody outside, and then you erase it immediately. Just like you just beam it, you just email it, and then it's gone, right? So you can get it off your computer really, really fast. All kinds of things like that. And not just for war zones or whatever. I mean, anybody who's a source who's vulnerable, you have to go to tremendous lengths to protect them, including just trying to erase copies of their comments if you think it might endanger them.
But going back to Tahrir Square, the authorities could go on the CBC website, check what you're doing, BBC and any other network. So it's difficult to protect your source if you have somebody talking to you on camera openly, even if, you encrypt whatever you're sending. Nowadays, you can be anywhere in the world and watch the CBC.
Yeah. But at the same time, we can't be doing the dictator's job. And
Yes.
so we can't do it. If they want us to be afraid of that. They want them to be afraid. So I quite often, as long as I think that I was convinced they understood the implications of speaking, that I would speak to, I would have somebody on. And in some cases, young people we know did get arrested afterwards, right? But they wanted to take that chance, and we can't deny them that. Because it was their moment, but it's very difficult choices to make.
I'd also like to thank you. I up on the cult of celebrity and social media, and see what your thoughts are on how to spread the ethics of humanity throughout journalists and those who want to be their own brand in terms of the general coverage of news in
Everyone
our
here?
society.
You want to repeat? She's asking if about the cult of celebrity and how is it possible to get humanity kind of infused into journalism to a greater degree, and less about the brand and about. Boy, we're headed in the other direction now, aren't we? In almost every respect. I mean, Jesus, we're spiraled down. We're watching everywhere. I have no idea. I can only speak for myself. Maybe even 2 years ago I could have had a better idea. But I'm just watching this freak show go on. It's just awful in politics and journalism everywhere. It's just everyone's screaming at each other. I have no idea how to recover this. I just pray to God that we can, but I know I have very little hope that it's going to happen. So, yeah, I know beyond my authority to tell you how we're going to do this. It's yeah, but yeah,
Don't.
No, don't. Listen to As It Happens.
Or CTV National.
Oh yes, yes. We're not building our bands here at all, right?
Yeah, just a little bit. But, there are young journalists, and there's parents of one of our young producers, and actually they are very ethical, and there still is a lot of good young journalists out there who understand they're not the story, and the story they're covering is the story. But when there's that much noise coming from high places like the White House, and that kind
Queen's
of
Park.
nonsense, or here at home, why go that far? Well, no, people are reading, and in fact, people are reading. People like opinion, because there's so much going on out there that they want to know. They want opinion as well. They want analysis. They want to go beyond what's going on, because what's going on sometimes doesn't make much sense, does it?
Thank you. I have a question about sources, and I was hoping that it would maybe be instructive given we're at a journalism school. But what you said around do sources understand the implications was something that really resonated with me. And I wonder if that's changed your protocol for how you interview people and sort of the conversation you have before the tape rolls, and if that's informed what you do as it happens with how people are sort of, I think this idea of do you bring more informed consent to your work as a journalist to make sure people do sort of understand the implications after the interview ends, and you go back to your job and they go back to their life?
Short answer is yes, and that my experience with the Ario balls taught me that, and because I think before, to a great degree, I was not looking back over my shoulder to see what was left behind, and I learned the hard lesson, to what degree, not just a little bit, not just yeah, they're okay, but to really, really go back, and that's changed. And as it happens, I work with producers, and we really talk about this a lot, about before we put somebody on, do they know what's going on? What are they? How are we going to protect them? All those things. To a great degree, we're doing that. I wish we could do more, but at some point, you just have to give people the right to speak, right?
What happens when a journalist is a player in a game? And I'm referring to human rights violations within Canada that are happening today. And often, the privileged in Canada who benefit from these human rights violations do include journalists. And I'm talking about being on unceded land of First Nations people as one of my examples, I guess. But how do you go about that when you're born being subjective?
Keep talking a bit, because I'm still trying to
Okay,
get the truth.
so as Canada's a product of colonialism, of course. I'm just using my example, but how do you go about that as a journalist who may be a colonizer reporting on human rights violations in Canada? Because you talked about Egypt and Sudan, where you were an outsider, you were coming in from a different country. What happens when you look in your own country as a journalist?
Well, okay. And we do quite a bit of that, most of what I do now is of our own country. I'm trying to, I'll take this where I think you want me to go with it, but I think that we're on a learning curve, all of us. I think that there have been, in the past, 5 years, the amount we have learned and I think all of us, and I think even Indigenous people too, didn't know the degree to some of the stuff that had happened. I think that the review of the residential schools and that whole investigation was such an eye-opener for us and for Indigenous people too, because they knew their own personal grief. They knew within their family or their community. They didn't know how widespread this was. We kind of had a vague idea that it was that large, but now we know. And we know we're layers and layers and layers of understanding this. And I'm trying to get that to inform what I do. And I'm on a learning curve. So yes, I come at it from a colonial point of view because this country was a colony. It took this land. We have benefited enormously as a country from what we took. We have the people, and anyone who's coming from other countries and saying, well, I wasn't part of that. I'm not part of your Anglo or Franco legacy. No, you are. Anybody who comes here is benefiting from the resources, the land and sea and everything else that we got. That is a fact, that it exists. And I am learning every day deeper, getting a deeper understanding of that and trying to be informed about that. And I'm flawed at it. I totally admit that. I want to understand that. I want that to inform my questions and what I do. And not just that I'm covering their story, but how do I open this up? How do I step away? How do I get out of the way of a whole bunch of narrative that has to be spoken? And we're all struggling with that, as we are with all kinds of other things, with LGBTQ knowledge that we're just so far not understanding, with people's genders and gender identity. Believe me, when you're 62 years old, as I am, whatever it is, this is new language. I have to learn it. I have to understand it, and I make mistakes, and I'm flawed at that. But I need others to tell me and to correct me, and I encourage that. And so, yeah, it's not. I know you can be angry about it and just say you guys are wrong, you guys are imposing your view, whatever. But look for those opportunities to get in there and inform us and tell us and open this up to other voices and get this dialogue going, because we must do it at this point. We're just so far behind.
And it's not only journalists. I asked in my newsroom 3 years ago, who learned about residential schools at school? Huh? Were you taught? I didn't go to school in Canada, but I wanted to know, because I was finding out about it and I was horrified. And I wanted my colleagues to tell me, did you guys learn this stuff? Did you know about this? And most of them was CBC English and French. I went to all my colleagues and asked that question, and most of them hadn't been taught. And there were some closer to your age, some closer to our age, 45, and
Or 106.
or 108, but they had not been taught that. So we have a long way to go as well in our own country, because we are finding out about these things now. Now in these recent years. So it's journalists and it's all of us, right? But we're walking, in the right direction, I think.
Well, it doesn't help that the Ontario government has cancelled the program to the education of Indigenous issues. You know about that. Not just sex ed got cancelled, but also the Indigenous issues part of the curriculum. Gone.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Very good.
And I'm wondering, especially over a 9-year process, was there any concern about what your domestic sources would think if they were to find out about your involvement? As you were saying, you were speaking to politicians on a nightly basis. So was that any concern at all, whether it was other politicians or other colleagues, about their doubting your credibility and your ability to speak to them about these issues?
It's a very good question. I gave a lot of thought to this, and it was a struggle to keep, and I was really relied on my colleagues and my bosses to always be aware, and I always spoke to them when I thought, okay, what do we do here? It wasn't like, every day I had to do a story about this, but it got to for about 2 or 3 years, during the very crucial time when I got through all the United Nations problems and I was now trying to get through all the Canadian problems, that I was faced with this dilemma frequently. But I was more worried, actually, that I was more worried that the government would punish them because of the questions I was asking. I was actually more worried for them. And one of the reasons that we're telling them to take, I was going to send them money and tell them to run, is because I was worried that my pushing the government for answers would, that they would not let this process happen. That they, the reason why it was taking so long is that my name was all over it, that my association with their file was what was stopping it. So I was far more worried about what that was doing, that what the government might do to them because of my profile than the other way around.
Well, I think I'm getting signals here. So, Karoloff, this was amazing.
thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
just give her a round of applause here.